Hello everyone, welcome to the Craft of Grading 2 for Effects PhD. This is Class 6. Today I will be going through my versions of the Coke Spot. First off, I'd like to thank everyone who submitted their work for the last class review. It was a lot of fun to see what everyone did and give you guys some nice critiques. And again, everyone did an awesome job, and thanks for submitting. Since I worked through the same footage after I saw your guys' stuff, it was very interesting to kind of see the struggles, the hard things about the shots, and just kind of understand better how you guys got to where you got. So it was a fun exercise, I must say. So first off, I'll just go through my first version for you guys. It's I'll show you, this is kind of my A version, I would say. It's the version that I like the best. It's definitely cooler in the barn up front, and then it goes into the back end of the shop where it's much warmer. So overall, the blacks are pretty crunchy, but it's got a decent amount of contrast. But I do like the fact that it contrasts the warm back end to the front end. It sets two moods. You rarely work on a 10-second commercial that tells a story. This is obviously a very trimmed down story here. So to make all this work together, it can be tricky. So but it was a lot of fun. So I'll just kind of start at the top and kind of walk through my layers and kind of my thought process of how I got to where I did. So we'll take a look at the first shot here. So I will just kind of go through my layers and kind of talk through my thought process and how I ended up where I did. So this is the first shot where I ended up, and this is the raw footage. I'll step through my stack here up to the top so we can go kind of layer by layer. But the way Baselight works is that you build these stacks of corrections. All the layers are highlighted in green. So here's my layer 3, layer 4. So I typically name my layers. I could keep like layer 1, layer 2 in there, but I don't. So hopefully that doesn't confuse anybody. So here's my input strip, the R3D. So what I typically do is go to red film log or red log film, but for some reason on this shot I did not do that. I left it at red gamma 2. So typically I'd go to red gamma or red log film. So the way I build my stack is I start with the input strip, and then on top of that, Baselight has a R3D strip, so all the parameters are in this strip, so I don't have to keep going back to my input strip and go to an R3D decode section of that strip. It's just kind of confusing. So I always drop in this R3D strip, and then all the parameters are in there. So which is nice, because when I hit bypass that layer, I can see kind of what you see is what you get, kind of the R3D, kind of how that looks in a more linear space. So what I'll usually do is on this, I'll convert it to red log film here. And then my next strip, which is the tech grade, will be my log to lin. And but for some reason on this particular shot, I left it at red gamma 2, which was what the default of the input strip was. So that happens. But so my next layer is my log to lin, which here I took my contrast. Typically the log to lin contrast is at 2, and you can see that crunches everything down. So I took that contrast way down, and it was more of a balance. So from input strip to the tech grade, which is what Baselight log to lin is called, I just balanced out some of the red because I wanted to go for a cooler look. So that's kind of the start of what I do. Like I'll go to this real quick to the next shot, because I did do red log film. Input strip, the tracker strip always defaults to the bottom of the input strip. So red log, the R3D strip is next in the sequence, and I do have it set to red log film. So you can see coming from the red Gamma 2, which is they defaulted, and then I put it to red log film. Then from there, I put in the tech grade, which is my log to lin, and also I use it as a balance. So that's my typical workflow for that, and I feel like I get a little more range and a little more, it's a little easier to color balance if I want to change the color temperature by using this tech grade log to lin strip, because it's just easier to balance the color temperature around opposed to going into an R3D strip and adjusting color balance there, or using a Baselight color correction. Just the tech grade has a little bit more of an exposure color temperature kind of feel to the correction, so I use that. So I just wanted to show you the red log film input because, again, my first shot I did not do that. So cool. So the first thing I do is I'll typically, after the tech grade, I'll go to just the main look layer, and here I dialed in some contrast, brought the blacks down. Here I have a layer on the high, I call it highs, on the highlights, and so you don't really see much of that till you get to when they have the doors open. So I just took some of the edge off it. So I may have been hard on somebody for clipping the whites on the ground there, but when I actually looked at the file, it was clipped out in the R3D file. So all I did was I just kind of grabbed the highs with a hue angle key, and I kind of isolated it with a shape. So I just wanted to leave the window on the left where it was. So I isolated that with a shape, and then I just softened it up. So that's what that layer is doing. This next layer, I felt like the area around the door was a little washy. I do like that look. I like that natural kind of doors open and it kind of washes out everything. But I wanted to maintain a little bit of the contrast there. So I just put a shape on there. And I didn't get too fancy with cutting this out because it's just a soft edge circle oval shape. So it does the job just by doing that. So, and there all I did was I dropped the gamma down a little bit, and that felt good to me. Let's see, the next shape, or next layer down, I have, this was, I think, to do a little bit of a match to the next shot, but this area got a little washy, and I felt like it was drawing my eye. So again, I just put another shape there. I didn't get too fancy with trying to do any cutout. I just put a soft edge circle shape in there, and brought the gamma down there as well. This shape, this is kind of more of an anal layer. I don't like sometimes on cameras where it clips out and it gets a little purpley magenta, so I just kind of grabbed this window here and just kind of desaturated the edges on that. For whatever reason, that lens, or maybe the sensor, went a little more purple, so I just took that down. There's still a little left, but it's not as bad as it was. That's completely not necessary, but I do that sometimes if it draws my eye. Let's see. So the next one, I didn't want to lose, by bringing the blacks down, I didn't want to lose some of these really cool out of focus highlights on the left here. So what I did is I grabbed a shape and just kind of, again, this one I did a custom shape, like easily. There you go. I easily could have just done an oval and softened it, but for some reason I did that. And just brought a little highlight into it because I felt like when I'm crunching the blacks down, I was losing a little bit of that cool out of focus highlight over there. So the next layer down, this one was a matching thing. If I go to the next shot, I was using this wall and I wanted to match up the wall in this first shot. So if I remove this layer, there's a little more warmth on this wall over here, and I didn't feel like it was matching. Those, I believe that's the same window, and it was throwing me off. So what I did is I used a circle shape and a hue angle, which is just a key, an HSL key, and just balanced out a little warmth right there. So, and I felt like that gave me a better match on those gray values. I don't know if that's concrete or if that's Not sure, I assume that's concrete. But so then the next layer down was the Coke machine there, rusted out and lonely in the barn on the floor there. So, and this one I didn't want to like hit anybody over the head with, okay, wow, there it is. You know, I just wanted to bring a little of that rusty brown color to it, because before it was kind of just washy and blended into the pile of wood behind it. So what I did here was I just, you know, cut it out with a custom shape there, and I used a Baselight tracker on that. And the Baselight tracker does a pretty decent job. And again, with color correction, you're trying just to get away with getting the track good enough so you just don't notice the color correction, you know, any technical issues with it. You don't have to be like perfect like in compositing or in visual effects. So this particular tracker I threw on there, and it started to shrink as the light subsided, going in reverse obviously there. But so I just had to compensate that track with a little keyframing to compensate for that, because I didn't want to mess with trying different track points, and that was good enough. And then I used a Baselight D key, which is their 3D keyer, a color picker that you just kind of select pixels and it builds a 3D key based on that. So it just was a little quicker than using the HSL hue angle key. And then I just balanced in a little rust with the gamma, adding a little warmth there, and then I brought the gamma down, and then it got me in a decent spot. You know, when you blow it up 500%, you can start seeing the lines in my shape and whatnot. But it's actually not too bad. But we're not looking at it at 500%, so it sells just fine. So that was my next layer down. Then the next one, I just kind of grabbed some warmer tones in there, because I felt like the wood beams and some of the wood was going a little red, a little pinky. And so I just used the HSL key to grab that, and just used gamma again to balance a little away from red. And that's a very, very subtle correction, but I think it helped match the next shot much better. So next layer down is part of my preset stack. I have a vignette preset layer that I have in every starting point, and I didn't use it, so it's just kind of empty there. But if a client saw it, it would look like a more impressive color correction because it was a little bit taller, but there's nothing there. So then the next layer down was a curve, and this particular correction wasn't an S curve that I was kind of coloring through. I actually just used it to kind of scoop up the mids a little bit and just open that up a little bit. So if I was going to use an S curve to kind of color through, I probably would have done that at the front end of the shot, but in this particular shot, I just used it to open up the mids. And because sometimes when you use gamma, it tends to bring up the blacks a little bit more. I like to grab the top end of the curve and just pull it up a little bit, and it gives me the effect I want. And then the last layer is my output layer. That's where I'll do some tweaks at the back end. And in this particular case, what I did on this output was I actually softened a little bit more whites and soft clipped the blacks so it didn't feel quite as hard. And again, that's downstream of everything. And then I noticed in some people's examples they sharpened quite a bit. So I thought, just to show you what I do in Baselight, it's not as, you won't notice the sharpening as much because I'm actually working in a medium proxy from the original 5K R3D shot. So there's filtering going on the down res of that medium proxy. So when I sharpen, you actually don't notice it as much as if I was in a 1-to-1. Maybe I can bring that up for you guys. So let's see. So now I'm in 1-to-1 5K, and now I'm using, it just blows it up on the graphics card, so that does its own filtering, but you can kind of see some of the sharpening I'm doing here. But again, I'm using a shape just to sharpen up this section and to keep it away from all this other out of focus stuff. But it's not as apparent, but and again, in Baselight, I can use a shape to kind of isolate areas to sharpen. But I probably should have said that at the front end of this particular shot, but I do work, typically on a red job, I'll work from R3Ds and throw it in a medium proxy and work from that. And we have a Red Rocket card installed and it runs pretty well. So we don't do any earlier with red files. We used to pre-render stuff to 2K or HD, whatever the job called for. But now we can work pretty much exclusively from the R3Ds and do, quite an extensive stacks of color corrections and be okay in session with clients. Cool, so that's shot 1, now to shot 2. And I think in a lot of people's, I was critical of how the light match from shot 1 to shot 2. They're really washed out and bright and backlit. Obviously, they're much further into the barn than in the first shot, but I felt like people could be more opened up. There can be more light that's pouring across them that kind of opens them up. So I won't go layer 1 to the last layer. I'll kind of jump around here while I talk through this one, but I do have this layer here, so I can see where people left it a little bit more crunchy. But for me, if I leave it there and then I cut back and forth, that doesn't feel like it matches to me as well. And also, if you look down, it's always nice to look at elements in the frame to kind of help direct where you want to go with it. But you can see it's a little dustier down there, so it's appropriate to kind of wash out the blacks a little bit there. I think you can get away with it. Again, the front end of the shot, I've tried to do them all the same. I made a mistake on the first one where I colored from red gamma 2, but this one is red log film. And again, I got the R3D strip with my tech grade, which is a log to lin again, with Baselight. And that's kind of bypassing that. But, this one, just, you can see this is my look layer, as I'm calling it. I did a lot of the cooling it off in that layer. And what I typically do is I'll use a lot of I'll work the gamma, the lift, cool off in all 3 lift gamma gain areas and just kind of do that until I feel, and also I'll take down saturation. That's kind of undoing saturation. You can see that helps with matching, but it all works together. Lift gamma gain, RGB differential, and saturation. So you just kind of have to play with it until you get to where you like it. But that was my look layer there. The Coke machine at the bottom, again, I isolated that with a HSL key and a custom shape. And this one was a little trickier because it started to bleed into this out of focus foreground element. So what I did is I took another shape and I subtracted that key with it. And then I just copied the track from the Coke machine down to this piece, and then I feathered that. And so you can see how it just kind of cuts it out, and that's just a way to blend those together so it looks more seamless, because you can see I'll delete that shape. So now if I didn't have that, you can see this line that cuts across here, which looks awful. So that's what that does. That smooths out that transition and it makes it look more seamless. And so whenever you're struggling with a secondary, that's a great thing just to remember to use a shape to subtract from that other shape to kind of dial in a seamless secondary. Cool. All right. Well then the next layer down, I used to grab the flesh tones, and so at first thought I felt like I was being a little lazy, but because I'm going cooler, I wanted to give it a feel of reality, like it was naturally that cool. By balancing the flesh tones to look more natural, it kind of sells the look. And but when I use an HSL isolation, it's picking up this timber, the 2x4s back there, some of the rust, and then obviously, and also the Coke machine. So I could have isolated with a shape their skin tones and just track that over, but just by warming up I'll A/B it for you. So that's without that correction. I labeled it flesh tones. I probably should have labeled it warm tones or warm tones / flesh tones. But so you can see what that, and I also have a blur on there. And I mean, you can see it. Typically, I don't leave it this kind of noisy and messy, but I have enough of a blur on there. It's enough. It's a moving shot. It's kind of foggy, and it just works, you know. So, but having the warm tone of the pillar, the everything in there helps sell this cooler look. And again, I'm not doing any green screen composite that has to be perfect. It's just selling the mood of the scene. So I was able to get away with it there. Sometimes, most of the time you're not able to get away with it. So, but when you can, it's nice. So you can see again, that's the warmth I'm putting in there. And again, I'm using gamma for that. So it just felt really red and pink. And which, when somebody's really cold, they may go that color, but I wanted to kind of warm them up, so that I just went there. So the next layer down the line this is another one of those kind of, I was being overly particular about matching these shots, but again, I wanted to make this concrete more clean, cool, and in this shot over the old man's shoulder, the wall is too warm for this match. So what I did there is, this time I used my 3D keyer, isolated that. It actually grabbed some of the old man's skin tone, so I used another shape to kind of cut that out and just track that over. And then at the same time, I moved that shape on the wall over. Kind of just animated that out. And so what that's doing, again, I'm just taking a little of the warmth out of that wall. Kind of here, down to here. And what you can see what that's doing nicely is it's kind of subtly popping the old man off the wall, because before it was a warm tone, and now it's clean and warm. So he pops out a little bit nicer. And that's a subtlety, but again, sometimes color grading is all about the subtleties. And just a little, something like, that's not what's matching these shots perfectly, but it just helps, So there's that layer. Next layer is just a little vignette on the top left there. Again, just to help bring your eye over. I name my vignettes north, south, east, west, southeast, southwest. Just it helps me know exactly which vignette I'm referring to. So it's just kind of my shorthand. So that vignette is also pulling some warmth out of the lower part of the frame. And there I'm using a little bit of gain, brightening it up with some gain, and using gain to balance out the warmth. And I think that's helping give me that clean look. Curve, I didn't use a curve or any kind of mid boost on that shot. And then again, my output layer, I used to soft clip the whites a little bit. And I think I may have done a little hue shift there with the blues. I think I just pulled some red out of the blues with a secondary there. But that's a decent match, I think. I think I mentioned in somebody's piece about this highlight being distracting, but again, when I came to look at the footage, it's very, very natural. But what I tried to do in this shot is I didn't want to go overly crunchy with it, because I love the blacks being a little lifted here, this highlight in the foreground over here. That all feels nice. And if you crush it down too much, you lose that. It's just a dusty look. So that's the second shot. Going into the third. So this shot comes up here. So it's actually pretty down, but it has nice exposure. There's all the highlight details there and shadow detail. So the key for me here was to kind of sell the vibe, color, mood of the previous inside the barn shots, and make the outside feel cold, but maintain a little skin tone, and try to keep that Coke machine rusty color a little more consistent. And typically I probably would have left the sky maybe naturally where it was, but I know some people attacked the sky with some blue with some correction. So I just want to show you what my technique would be on that sky. So I put a little blue up there. Again, R3D, started with the R3D strip and went with red log film down to my log to lin to my first layer. just dialing in a little. So on this one also, I'll go back to the Log-to-Lin tech grade. I also, if I bypass it, I actually am putting in quite a bit of exposure into this, because it is, when it comes up native, it is it's a little more down. So I wanted to open up the midtones in the foreground, and I don't mind it feeling a little washy, a little bit brighter. That's okay. I want to really kind of see their faces and some detail in the foreground. So then in my look layer, I just added in a little contrast. And the next layer down I have here is where I went after the sky. So you can see when I bypass it, the sky has much more warmth. And I'm not a really big fan of going overly blue with the sky. I mean, clients ask me to do it all the time. I mean, there's probably 9 out of 10 skies I'm putting blue in, but I don't say I'm kicking and screaming, but I like the skies to feel natural and not too overly blue. But you know, most of the time, the client's going to win on that one. But this is what I would tend to do: just go a little bit more subtle, a little more steely blue, just kind of natural. So what I did there is I used a HSL key. I feel like the edges I can soften up a little bit better with an HSL key. So the 3D key on Baselight can have a harder edge. So I'd rather feather out my hue, saturation, luminance isolations with a soft edge than with the 3D key. You can really only blur it. So what I suggest when you're doing skies is, what I find that gives me good results, is to use a shape up top and then feather that down. And then by the time you get down to the horizon, which typically the horizon doesn't have as much blue as the rest of the sky, you're back to natural. So I saw a lot of, in a few of the people's members' submissions, you started to see the key down below. This is a great trick to avoid that by getting your main part of your correction full up top, and then as you get down, you feather it naturally, and it tends to get a very nice real look to it. And this particular shot, it was bleeding onto the barn, so then I used another shape to minus out. You can see as I pull it over, it was picking up the guy's highlights and different things there. So again, I just used it to garbage out the barn. So it feels natural. It kind of goes to that colder look, and I think it sells nice. So then the next layer down, I got the old man's flesh tone. Again, this is just a little tweak, but he felt a little red to me, so I just kind of tweaked out a little red. I think I'm going to have a class coming up where we talk more about flesh tones, but you can do a few things with skin tones. Sometimes you can go over to your 6 vector and maybe just grab your hue control on red and just rotate it a little bit away from red. That sometimes works. Sometimes you can go in there with your gamma. In this particular case, I just took the gamma and I just balanced out a little red, a little bit towards yellow. So I'll go into more detail about skin tones in the next class, or in a future class, but balancing out red tends to be a common thing with skin tones. So that's all I did there. And here again, I used a shape to isolate with a track, and then I offset that track with some, because once the machine went in front of him, my track went crazy. So I used a few keyframes to keep that consistent. And then I took another shape and I minused out as that came over. So you can see kind of what that shape's doing there. And it's, I got a little sloppy. It's grabbing the side of the Coke machine, but you actually don't even notice that. So that's that layer on the old man's skin tone. Then the next guy, I got, again, an isolation on his skin tone. Sometimes you can get away with one correction on 2 people's skin tones because I'm basically doing the same thing, but here I did it in 2 layers. So this guy, I'm just pulling out a little red. This time I did the same thing, use a little gamma to pull out a little red. Sometimes it's skin tones, you're working lift gamma gain, but sometimes the funkier skin tones is when you're using gain too much. You're putting too much yellow into the highlights and they start to feel jaundicey or start to look odd. So stick to your mids, but it really depends on the shot. This one feels more mid-tony and that's what worked. So the next layer down is I just have a little vignette on the bottom left, as I call it, the southwest region there. And you could, you know, in hindsight, maybe I could even leave that off. I don't know if it's necessary, but it gives it a little shape down there and a little more interest, so that's okay. The right vignette, east vignette, I just darken the right side of the frame just to kind of direct your eye over a little bit. And I mentioned in somebody's submission that, I don't know if it was on this shot, but sometimes having a vignette, you can kind of feel it move as it pans over. I think it was this shot. And you can feel it move on this one. And now that I'm working with the footage, if I bypass it and I just play the original, it's actually some lens vignetting in the camera. So my vignette on top of the natural vignette in the camera, you start to feel it more. So that's something to look like. That kind of bothers me. I could probably put a shape in there to open that up so it kind of offsets it, but I won't go too crazy with it. But that's something to keep an eye on. It definitely, a client might say, "Oh, I see your window," and then you can say, "Oh, well, it's natural to the scene. Do you want me to finesse that?" A lot of times they'll say, "Oh, no, it's fine," but just something to pay attention to. So this next correction, I have it on the Coke machine there, and here it just felt a little blue, felt a little cold, not as rusty as I want. So I was trying to go more in this rust kind of vibe. So again, I just kind of isolated that with my 3D keyer, and I put a custom shape on there. And I could have tried using some keyframe or some motion tracker on there, but I knew that was going to be a disaster for a colorist to try. So I stuck to my good old keyframes, and it did a decent job. So, but what I did have to do was, again, minus out the car there. So I built another subtraction garbage mask on the side of the car there. So again, I just used a little gamma to warm up the Coke machine to get and kind of dial in that color. And it worked out nice. My next layer down is put a little vignette on that top left, and I really like the way that kind of helps bring your eye over, and just gives a little bit more interest up in the top left of the frame there. And it's subtle. I got a soft feather on that window. Again, it's just an oval, big oval that I feathered out, and feels nice. And then I did put I felt they were getting a little muddy, so I used a little curve, a little point on the curve up, kind of the upper portion of the curve. I just pulled up just a little bit to open them up. And then my output strip, I used just to soft clip the whites there, just to smooth it out. If you can see here down to here, so that's just it's a highlight. It's a highlight correction that it's very zoned into the highlights that I bring down. Then I have a pivot on that where I can really finesse it, so it's a really soft. It's not affecting the higher mids or the low highlights. It's affecting more the high highlights, and that's what I use to soft clip things. And my little output strip kind of comes from my Nucoda Filmmaster days, because back then the Nucoda Filmmaster really talked up the fact that they had GPU acceleration, and they were one of the first to implement that. And the GPU accelerator was nice because they guaranteed real-time functionality on certain layers, and one of them was the output layer. I think they called it the master layer, and it was the layer that came downstream of everything. So if you had a whole timeline rendered or cached out for a client review, and then the client had you just do a few tweaks, you could just do the tweak on the output layer, and it was already cached, and then it was a real-time effect on the output layer. So that's kind of where I developed this output layer technique, and Baselight's on GPU acceleration now, and it's pretty speedy with all these different layers, so that kind of functionality isn't as necessary, but I like the concept of having a last output strip. It's kind of like your last effort to tweak out the image. So I kind of, and it's nice to have soft clipping on there too, but that's kind of what I use the output strip for. So that's kind of a before and after on that shot. Again, I just put a little sharpening kind of zoned on them. You know, it's kind of a moving shot. It's not, you don't feel it as much, but it's sometimes it's nice to sharpen up things a little bit. Cool. So then next shot. Now this is what I really like about this kind of sequence is we go with this little cooler. It's not overly pushed, but it definitely has a colder look, and then we cut to the inside and it's a little more saturated, a little warmer. And this is the original on this shot. And I was kind of just cutting between these. And again, people had a little, I was a little critical about the match on this shot. And again, it's a trickier match, you know, the amount of light on his face from the wide to the close, it's a little tricky. You know, this is pretty close. Another thing that I think was throwing it off was the Coke machine on the right there. If you don't go over there and try to isolate it and brighten it up, because you can see how bright it is on this shot. You can probably darken it on this shot. I chose to isolate it on this shot and brighten it up. So again, I have my R3D strip in my log to lin, and most of the work I'm doing on this look layer from just dialing in some contrast with lift gamma gain. And then when I do that and I crunch down the blacks, the left side got a little crunchy for my taste, so, and it actually was there. And so for this match, I felt like this side was just way too dark, so I built a shape on the side here. I mean, that looks actually kind of cool, but as far as a match, it wasn't right. So I just kind of opened it up, and there I just kind of brought up a little gamma and a little gain to get to that point, and then put a soft feather on that shape. Then I went in to grab flesh tone. Again, I used the HSL key to do that. And I didn't do too much other than, again, I always try to get rid of the red, pinky, magenta out of skin tones. I prefer more, you know, warmer skin tones. And that's kind of there to there. And again, that I used pretty much gamma to, yeah. So I'm just undoing what I did there, and it was all gamma on the skin tones. And so then my next layer, again, is just an empty vignette layer from my original base correction. Let's see, next layer down is my, you know, this is, you know, sometimes when you're looking at a shot and you're like, this doesn't match what's going on. I feel like tonally it's right, but just something's weird. You know, start looking around for different color temperatures that are throwing you off. Like this shot, the skin tone was right, the Coke machine was right, but the background felt really green to me. And from this particular angle, there may be something green back there, but you don't see it in the wide. So I was feeling it in the close-up. So what I did is I just kind of used my HSL key, and it defaulted to those tones, and they tended to be a little greener. So as you can see, A being this, kind of here to here, it just pulls out that green. And like in the Big Lebowski, it kind of ties the room together in my kind of opinion, you know. So it's just a small correction, but I like, you know, it kind of sells it for me. And it's small stuff like that, again, that kind of helps refine your image. So again, then I'm back down to this Coke machine. I just needed a little brightness, and I can see I got a little sloppy down here, this little key edge here. Not sure what I was thinking there, but I'll kind of feather it out a little bit better. But and again, that just helps match these shots. Brighter Coke machine, and then now it feels about right. So curve, I didn't use a curve on this one. And some colors, you know, have the same techniques. They always use the curve on this shot. You know, they use an S curve on everything, or they don't. They use different lookup table. I'll just, whatever the shot kind of feels right, and however I can use the shot, I'll kind of go from there. I tend to start from a stack that's kind of consistent. This is my typical stack. Everything's empty. Then I build from there. But if I use a curve, or I don't use a curve, if I use a different lookup table, if I use a lookup table at all, you know, it just depends on the shot. So this one I sharpened up the face a little bit, not too much, but yeah, It's a nice, kind of nice, straightforward kind of look, but it feels nice, nice contrast. And then we'll cut to the next shot. This one was a little trickier. I think I went a little crazier on the layers. You can see it just, one of my little pet peeves about Baselight is the way they do their timeline and layering structure. Like if you have too many layers, it goes off the timeline, and it's kind of annoying to kind of cycle up to your other layers, but that's just kind of how it is. But on this shot I have about 21 layers, which that gets a little crazy, but I wouldn't say that's typical, but sometimes it happens. So again, started with my R3D strip to my log to win to my base correction. So kind of dissect this correction a little bit more here. So this highlight, again, this was all about drawing my eye. I just kind of look at this shot, native, here it is, where do I look? My eye right away goes to the lamp in the back of the room, which I don't want it to, so I'm going to remember to try to bring that down. And that whole back little area is pretty bright, so I want to tone that down. The highlight on this tarp for this, it's like a Care Bear sheet or something. I don't know what that is. But anyway, it's this painting sheet that's drawing my eye. The reds of I mentioned this in the last class, the reds here are kind of drawing my eye away from the Coke red. I'm going to take that down and just kind of shape this image up. So let's see. So yeah, again, this it's taking the highlight down of that sheet there. I have another little vignette, and this was just, I think at the end of the correction, I felt like it was a little saturated in the center, so I threw a shape, but I didn't want to I kind of liked all the saturation of around here, so I just kind of isolated this with a shape and just desaturated it. Again, I got a little fancier with it. I felt like I liked the lamp there. It had a mood of, he's working late in the night to finish up this machine, but I just felt like it was too bright back there. So what I did is I took a shape here and I darkened it down, and then I took another shape and I feathered it up. So right here it looks like it's a 100-watt bulb or something in a lamp, and it's way too bright back there. And then I just threw in a little 15-watt bulb or something, and just tones down that background a little bit for me. And again, keeps my eye a little bit away from that area. My next little vignette, I just put a little vignette on the bottom just to kind of soften that down there a little bit. This one, it was really bright on the right, and it's kind of, again, it's very busy. It's a very busy frame, so it's however I can take down that busyness and pull my eye to the artist in the middle there, or American scrapper guy, whatever he is, and take that down on the right. And so then this one was a little interesting because I kept going down to that secondary Coke machine back there in the background. So I just put a little window above his left leg there and just took down that highlight there. And again, just kind of working the frame a little bit. And then again, I took the highlight down around him, behind him. There's the little shape here. And then this layer, I kind of just isolated around him and used that to kind of do an inside-outside around him. And I pretty much just desaturated everything around him with that layer. And actually, I did a little differently. I could have just cut him out and colored the outside of that shape, but I, for some reason, did it two shapes and colored on the inside of them. Sometimes you're just making it up as you go, so it... So let's see here. Again, this is just me taking the red out of the chest there just to help keep those reds, the Coke red. There I just tracked a custom shape on it, and I didn't use any keys. I just kind of desaturated it. Going down the layers here. That whole back area was drawing my eye, so I took some gamma down and just darkened it up. Another layer. Just zoned out that bottom right corner and darkened that. I put another layer, another shape on the background and just darkened that entire area. This next layer was a skin tone correction, and you can see how it's grabbing some of the paint cans and back there, but again, it's such a wide shot. I could probably go in there and isolate and track it a little bit better, but it's really unnoticeable. So again, that was just a correction to kind of take some of the pinky stuff out of the skin tone to match the shot prior. So my next layer down was this little, I assume it's the gas tank back there. And again, that was just drawing my eye. I tried swinging the color to something other than red. And you can just take the hue and just swing it around. And I do that just to get an idea without going crazy. You just kind of swing it around to a different color. And it's kind of fun to make it another primary color. It's kind of cool, but at the end of the day, any of those colors are going to draw your eye. So I ended up just making it more of a black. And because if I had a motorcycle, it would be a flat black and it would look cool. So I think that's where I'm going to go with it. And so again, that's the tank correction there. The next layer down. I felt like it was getting a little washy warm. So this is a nice little trick just to use a soft edged key that's just grabbing the blacks. And if you look over on the right side of my GUI here, it's just this little triangle that's just grabbing the lower blacks. And then I'm just using a little gamma to throw a little blue in the blacks. It's a little overused, but again, it helps just for a little color contrast. It's all it's doing. It's just, I'm kind of bluing up his blue jeans there, and it helps subtly pop the red. So that was my last layer out. Curved, didn't use a curve. Output, just a little soft clipping on the highlights. And I have a sharpening. It's just a little sharpening overall there. So that's kind of before and after on that one. So again, this one was a lot about shaping, a lot about directing the eye. And I'll tend to do this maybe more in features, in short films and feature films, where you're trying to kind of help kind of mold the lighting a little bit. But commercials tend to be a little bit brighter anyway. But so yeah, anyway, that's my first pass. And I spent more time on this one because I tend to like cooler looks, and I like the contrast between the front end and the back end. So, and I do like the flary stuff going on, so I don't want to overly crunch that and lose any of that stuff. So that's pretty much where my first version went. I'll jump to my next version. And again, it was just like, I hate to say it, but I went warm with a warm look and a cool look. And brighter, darker, warmer, cooler, as I said before. It's just kind of very deliberate A and B for a client to look at, just something for them to really react to, and it's very quick, you can dial in. And so having a warm look, having a cool look felt a little more obvious, so that I did do a third look. It's more of an idea that I thought would be something different, but this is just a warmer look. I didn't go as crazy on the layers because it's kind of a fun exercise, but if you do a shot and you have like 30 layers and you kind of feel good about it, it looks cool, every layer has a purpose, and then deconstruct it, start over, and try to get to that same kind of look with only 2 layers. A lot of times you can do it. So sometimes it's a fun idea to, if you start getting crazy with all these different layers and effects, save that, do it again, and just try to get there with a primary and maybe one window or something, and just see, because a lot of times the less is more, and sometimes being more true to the real image can feel a lot more authentic. So here's the warmer look, which I didn't like quite as much, which is probably why I didn't spend as much time on the warmer look. And then the back end is somewhat similar to the other spot. I kind of was digging how this was looking actually compared to my first pass. This is the one shot that I kind of felt better about, and didn't feel quite like I'll A/B it for you guys. This is what I did in the first version. It felt a little, how do I want to say it? I don't want to say muddy, but it felt a little washy. And I felt like this again, I'd put a little blue in the black, and felt like it wasn't quite, I didn't go as crazy with the zoning of contrast and densing. I felt like this is a little bit more of a real look, but I think it totally works. And I would probably go with this look over my A version from our first review. So anyway, let me just go through these really quick. I didn't again go as crazy. So here I just put a little layer there. Just I don't even. It's like I brightened that one, but again, I love that highlight, so I did the same thing. I just used a shape to brighten up that left side. I have an empty vignette down there. I didn't use a curve or output. So again, I try to be a little more basic with this because it's still a nice look, but it's not as, I didn't go as crazy with all the layers, and it still works. So it's just, again, something to think about. Some colors, can say, oh, you did 50, I did 30 layers or whatever, and it doesn't necessarily make it better. It just, because a lot can be done just in primaries in a few vignettes or secondaries. So in this shot, it's very minimalistic as far as my layers. R3D strip with a log to lin. Most of the work, most of the heavy lifting, you could say, was done in the primary. I did, most of it was with lift gamma gain that I did here. I did a little bit of a curve adjustment that's just my curve on and off. Again, I just did a little boost, a little mid boost. I did a little hue shifting. I did all the flesh tones in the 6 vector, and that was just with a trick to play with is to take your yellow and go away from green, and then take your red and go away from magenta. So you're basically kind of squeezing down those skin tones, and that's kind of what that's on and off. So without pulling a secondary on those skin tones, I use just a 6 vector, which in the Baselight tool set is just basically primaries, even though it's technically probably a secondary, but it's in their kind of tool set without using keys. And I just was able to pull red out and get a nice looking bronzy skin tone with just, again, pulling magenta out of red and pulling green out of yellow. So play with that. That's kind of a fun thing to look at. And then in this shot, again, this is just probably a lot more contrast. Again, this is my primary, so all the heavy lifting of contrast was in the primary. Very similar to the last shot. I used a little curve mid boost. My lift gamma gain is pretty much there to there. Again, I used the hue shift to pull a little red, a little magenta out of the reds, and a little green out of the yellows. See, I got the same correction like in the last version. The old man had more red in his face, so I just pulled red out with a little gamma. Same with this other guy in the foreground, just pull a little red out, a little saturation, and that's it. It's a little more basic. I didn't actually do anything to the sky other than put a little vignette in the top left. So, and I prefer a little bit more of a minimalistic sky, but it's all to taste. So if you like a really bright blue sky, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's all your personal taste. So, and obviously what you can sell to your client. And so the next shot, the only thing different I did to this shot was just add a little bit more of the blue black in there. So it's actually very similar, and the skin tones are a little more saturated. So that's kind of original to this new. And again, I do prefer, especially this shot, I prefer this over what I did in that first version I walked through for you guys. And that was first version to my second version. So if I was gonna combine, I would probably combine the back end of the second version with the front end of the first version. And what I did different here, I was a little bit more, again, I just kind of darkened the background. Back there, the whole top of the frame I just pulled down. The whole bottom of the frame I pulled down by using a kind of a vignette custom, I call it vignette custom shape that I kind of cut around here just to pull the floor down a little bit because it was feeling a little washy. Because you can see right here, your eye goes to the floor. Let's see, I pulled down the tool chest there. skin tone, did the same kind of skin tone correction. Same thing with that motorcycle tank. And so again, I was a little more minimalistic with this shot. I ended up in a better place, because sometimes when you go crazy with windows like I did in that first version, it feels a little too affected, so to speak. So this, I tonally and just mood wise, I kind of like this better. It might be a little more saturated, but that's okay. So that is the second version. So I will now jump to in this version, I pretty much I felt like I needed something a little bit more, much more different than a warm and a cool look. So I thought it'd be fun just so really quick before shooting this current class, I just kind of did a little more washy, the blacks are really bright, and just kind of a little more moody look. I shouldn't say moody, it's a little bit more, just a lighter, softer look, more desaturated. And it totally works. It's not, sometimes heavy contrast isn't necessarily the way to go. Like, I still would like to work on this version a little bit more, but it was more of an idea that I wanted just to kind of show you guys. So, like this shot is, because this shot, again, like I love the dustiness of this shot, and if I A/B from my first version that I really liked, you can see like how, and I added a little film grain to it, but just opening up these blacks, just making it a little bit washier. It almost feels a lot more dusty. It just has a different mood to it, different look, and it seems to be a little more popular these days in the States. As far as in TV commercials, you'll see a lot more open spots. There's a lot of little really bright. The blacks are really kicked up, just to kind of, and they jump off the screen. When you're watching TV, everything's very contrasty, and then a really flat, tonally flat spot comes up, and it, at least as a colorist, I'm like, oh, what's this? So it's something to experiment with and see if you like it or not. But it works on this shot. I would want to finesse it maybe on a few of these other shots, but here's the original. That gets a little too washed out, but it has a nice kind of soft, dreamier kind of look to it. Again, this shot, I kept the blacks fairly high. I'll just to show you some scopes here, but so the first shot, they're much more down until they open the door. This shot, they're raised up, so nothing's really clipped. Everything's just kind of sitting up a little bit, which is just something to try. So, and then again, this shot, I kept the blacks a little bit lighter. So, and then I kept the reds, a little more of the reds in there. And again, this was just a quick thing. I just wanted to show you guys to just think outside the box. A lot of people jump to crunching the blacks right away, but it's not necessarily the best thing to do on every project. So cool. Well, that was a lot of fun. Thanks everyone for watching and submitting your pieces in the last class. It was fun to dissect some footage that everybody else took a crack at first, and to see what kind of challenges they went through. And keep posting in the forums if anybody wants to play with this footage and get my opinion on it. Feel free. And like everybody's been doing. And until next class, we'll see you in the forums, and thanks for watching.